What's up guys, Dustin Connell here, and just want to dive into a technique that is really popular right now. It's kind of taking the fishing world by storm, but the term shaking a minnow, you know, is a big deal. And Rapala with CrushCity has came out with two specific baits that I use for this technique, and that have won me a lot of money, and as well as my good buddy Jacob Wheeler. I'm gonna dive into the why, how, when, all about this technique that I do for myself, you know, when I'm on the water, when I'm trying to figure out what these fish are doing. And I'm gonna go into the setups, I'm gonna go into the line size, we're gonna do a deep dive into shaking a minnow. You know, the first thing before I dive into tackle, you have to understand what's going on underneath the water, okay? You know, for years, we didn't really understand what a lot of fish do. We knew that they got out in the middle of the lake. We knew we see schooling activity, but with the invention and the use of the forward-facing sonar, I use active target too, we can now understand how these fish act. We see how they react to certain baits. We know what sections of the lake that the bait are in, or what size bait they're relating to. So if you look behind me here, you know, you'll see some bait right there around on top of the surface, and every now and then you'll see some schooling activity. And just from the size of the bait I can see on top, they're fairly small. You know, I would probably bet them are thread fin. You know what's cool about these baits from CrushCity is the Mooch Minnow is a perfect imitator for the thread fin, okay? On the other side of things, we have a bigger bait, which is the Freeloader. This is a gizzard shad, you know, size, and you can still catch smaller fish on both of these, but you just kind of got to match the hatch. I've seen it to where they don't want to eat a bigger bait, they want smaller stuff. So that Mooch Minnow is perfect. The biggest thing when you're choosing one of these baits is you just kind of got to know the size bait that they're eating, you know, and I'm always paying attention to the water. I'm paying attention to fish, you know, shad that are swimming near the boat. And if I catch one, they might spit up a shad, and I know the size. And you know, places kind of like Lake Fork, Gunnersville, you're gonna have way bigger bait, you know, gizzard shad. I mean, you may have bait that's that big, but here, you know, I'm in Alabama, and a lot of them are that size. When you reel one in and you catch a fish and they spit up a bait, it's that size, it's perfect. All right, going into, we're gonna do a deep dive into the depths of the fish, what size jig heads, what size line. I mean, I'm really gonna dive in and give out some nuggets is what I call them, how I like my setups and what I like doing, okay? All right, say, for example, I'm on a lake that has a lot of thread fin, a little bit smaller bait, you know, places like Dale Hollow, the Coosa River, you know, I won on Lay Lake, Red Crest, those fish were eating threadfin shad. So I had the Mooch Minnow. This is in gizzard shad color. And if I'm on a lake like that, I'm gonna reach out and get the Mooch Minnow. I'm gonna tie on, you know, 10 or 12 pound fluorocarbon. I use Seaguar Gold Label fluorocarbon, and this is 12 pound. And right now I have a 3/8 ounce tungsten swim bait jig head by VMC. These are brand new, and they're awesome. They come with the vanadium. Let me make sure I'm right on that. These are new to me as well. Vanadium steel, okay? And that's a really strong hook, okay? And the one I have right here is a 1/0 hook. This is a 3/0, and that's actually in a 3/16 size. So, you know, going through the size of your jig head, you have to understand what depth the column that they're in, the fish are in. You always want to keep your bait above these fish's head. You never want it to get below it. And I kind of think back to crappie fishing, okay? So I've always learned that from the old time crappie guys, don't let it get below the fish, okay? And I feel like the crappie fishermen, they understand that, they understood that way before bass fishermen. Don't never get it below the crappie's head. You know, if you get it dead even with them or let it go below them, they're just not gonna eat it. That ain't as natural, you know. You gotta think when a shad or a bait fish is trying to get, you know, when a fish is after them, they're not gonna go down. They're coming up to the surface to get away. So you gotta keep it up. I have a 3/8 ounce on right now in the tungsten swim bait head. And the main reason for that is a lot of the fish that I've been catching have been deeper. This 3/8 is gonna be good for your 20-foot stuff, 15. If I get deeper than 20, I change to a half. If I'm deeper than 25, 30, I go to a 3/4. That's what's cool about these jig heads. They come from a 3/4. This is a 3/4 3/0 hook, okay, got that? And I mean, they're tungsten, they're a very small profile. You have a lot smaller profile in tungsten, so these right here are 3/4. These are my halves, okay? Halves in a 1/0. We also have a half, a 3/4 in a 1/0. And that's kind of an odd sizing that I've always wanted, is a 3/4 with a 1/0 hook. You can still throw a smaller bait, get down there really quick to them. So places like Table Rock, your Highland Lakes, even Lanier, when they get really deep in the wintertime, you can throw a 3/4 1/0 with a smaller bait like this Mooch Minnow. Okay, but what I want to do is I want to dive into why I use a 3/8, why sometimes I use an 1/8 ounce. The number one thing is keeping it above their head. The number two thing is getting the bait down there to the fish fast. These fish are typically swimming, okay? If I'm out in the middle of the lake or I'm in the middle of this pocket and those fish are on bait and they're following them, they're always moving. We're not fishing after a stationary fish, you know, just sitting there. So the 3/8 allows me to get down to 15 foot way quicker. I can get that in front of that fish's face, keep it above his head, he'll come up and eat it. So you got to understand, the boat's moving, the fish are moving. If I make a pitch out there, sometimes I have to lead that fish and lead him out there. I'm like, oh man, I'm almost to him, and you'll miss him. But if I can get down there quick and get it right in front of his face and get him to react on it, that's the biggest thing, okay? On the other side of the coin, if the fish are shallow, if you go back and look at videos from Lay Lake when I won Red Crest, a lot of the fish were just under the surface 2 to 3 foot, 4 foot max. I mean, they were swimming up high. I call them high flyers. That's kind of what I've termed it. So they're high flying. So if I'm you know, seeing some fish up on top and they're blowing up and they're just really shallow under the water, it just, of course, go to a shallower jig head, keep it up high. Don't be afraid to tie on an 1/8 ounce, okay? This is what I have, yep, that one right there. So this is my 1/8 ounce 3/0 hook, okay? An 1/8 ounce jig head with a 3/0 hook that's super stout. I can keep that bait really, really high. I mean, I'm talking 2 foot under the surface. And you got to think about it. When you're out there fishing, a lot of times we see bait fish that are just right underneath the surface. That's what those fish are keying on. They're always looking up. So the 1/8 ounce, I caught them at Toledo Bend on the 1/8 ounce and the 1/4. You know, I'd have a lighter setup, I'd have a deeper. And that's what's cool about this technique. You can catch fish in all different depths and have 4 or 5 rods rigged up. So when I'm going out and doing this, I'll have an 1/8 ounce, a 1/4. I'll have a 3/8, a half, even a 3/4 if I know they're out really deep. You just always keep in mind, keep it above their head. That's why you need a lot of different sizes jig heads and even different size hooks, okay? Because I may want to put a freeloader on this 3/0 hook on a 1/2 ounce or even a 3/4 ounce head. You can actually do that as well. But typically for the freeloader, you know, that's my setup. That's what I do for the Mooch Minnow, okay? I'm gonna go ahead and slide him on here. So all I'm gonna do, slide him straight through. Get him on there as straight as you can. The Mooch Minnow is made out of TPE material, so it's stretchy. Pull that tab, okay? Pull the bottom of it and slide him up on there. He just pops right up on there. You can put a little dab of glue right there on your jig head, and that'll keep him locked in. And you can catch freaking 10, 15, 20 fish on this one bait because he is very durable. All right. I haven't really touched on the bait. I mean, I think we've covered a lot of people have heard about this bait, but I'll touch on it real quick if you haven't heard about it. The Mooch Minnow is a minnow style bait. What's cool about this is it has a really good rocking action, and that's been a really good deal to get these fish to trigger. You know, you've seen Jacob Wheeler, he won on Gunnersville throwing a freeloader. And this bait on that jig head rocks really, really well. So this bait, the Mooch Minnow, rocks really well, but it also has a tab at the end of it, okay? See that little small tab? That tab just sit there and just jives. And if you ever watch a shad in the water, that shad ain't sitting here doing this, like a big paddle tail. He's barely just, you can barely even see his tail moving. This is very subtle. I love throwing subtle things, especially because all these lakes are getting really, really pressured right now. So that's my setup for the Mooch Minnow 12 pound. I use 15 pound braid, 12 pound gold label. Change your jig head size depending on how deep the fish are. Keep it above their head. And that's the Mooch Minnow. I'm gonna move to the Freeloader real quick. This is a VMC hybrid jig head, okay? It has a screw lock on it at the very top of it. You know, I just screwed this on here a while ago. But that screw lock keeps that Freeloader in place really, really, really well. Like I could pull on it really hard and catch a lot of fish. You know, this hybrid jig head is the original one that Jacob and myself have been throwing a lot. And they're hard to find. A lot of people have figured out this jig head, Freeloader, everything about it is perfect. It has the O'Shaughnessy style hook bend. That's what I really love about it. And this size is a 3/16, okay? I've really been tinkering with those lighter sizes. I really hate to let that out because a lot of guys associate sitting out in the middle of the lake fishing deep. I'm not necessarily fishing deep, I'm fishing where the fish are at. And if they're in 4 foot, I'm pulling this out, 3/16. So at Toledo Bend, I would have 3 of these rigged up. I would have a 3/8, a quarter, and an 1/8, or even a 3/16, you know, depending on the depth. And you'll get a different action out of each, you know, each weight on your jig head. You know, if you get over a 3/8 ounce on your jig head, it don't tend to rock as much because you got to throw slack in your line to get that bait to rock. And if the weight is heavy enough, if it's too heavy, it kind of restricts that rocking action. You kind of need it kind of lighter. So I've been tinkering with some 1/8 ounce weights, stuff like that, to really get some good action. But on a lake that has gizzard shad, I'm going to use the same size line, the same size setup, but just keep in mind, keep it above their head. I'm using forward facing sonar, I'm using my active target. I've really dialed in my pitches. I know how to lead the fish, and I'm always watching my bait and knowing exactly where it's at. That's how you do very well using this technique. You can also use this technique not chasing bait fish, not chasing fish on bait. I've caught a ton of fish on this Freeloader on just isolated stumps. A stump in 5 foot. I don't have to be out in the middle of the lake. I know a lot of guys don't like getting out in the middle of the lake. They're not really comfortable being out there. You don't have to. You can go down the bank with this bait. That's what's cool. There may be a stump out here, or maybe a brush pile off of this point right here. And those fish have seen jerk baits, they've seen top waters, they've seen spinner baits, you name it. And they're finicky as all get out. If I know they're finicky, I'll pull up and throw this Mooch Minnow and just slow walk it right over the top of them. And once they start coming after it, you know, keep it above their head. It's the same principle, and they'll come out and go down with it. They haven't seen that technique as much. I mean, for 20 years, they've seen freaking spinner baits and all that. You know, fishing is, trends have changed, but these fish have changed. That's the key. They've been pressured, they're educated. I mean, I remember years ago, you know, guys used to say, hey, you never had to leave the bank. You can just flip all year round. You can throw spinner baits. It's almost like they run from the bank now because they know they're getting pressured. But yeah, that's what's cool about this technique. You can go down the bank and catch them. I can skip this bait underneath the dock and walk it underneath the dock and try to pull some fish off dock poles with it. It's a very versatile bait. The main reason is it's their forage. It's what they eat. I would say 80% of the lakes over the US, maybe even 100%, I don't know, they eat shad. That's their main forage. You know, places up north might be goby, might be crawfish, but for the most part, Tennessee River, gizzard shad, threadfin. Coosa River, gizzard shad, threadfin. Texas lakes, big baits, big gizzard shad, freeloader, stuff like that. You know, one thing I did not touch on is the color of the bait. Typically, I'm gonna be throwing shad colored baits, but there's different hues, the same way with a crankbait and a jerkbait. You know, hey, what color do you like in dirty water? It's the same principles. If I'm in some dingy water, I'll pull out an albino shad. If I'm in some muddy water, you got your pearl white. Okay, I caught them on this at Toledo Bend. If I'm in clear water situations like right now, we're gonna go try to catch one, I've got a gizzard shad on. Gizzard shad color is what I won Lay Lake on. And the water wasn't super clear there. I mean, I could still catch them. But the thing is with the color is, I want some drawing power. I don't mind something that's very, very subtle, that's very, very natural, but if I can get some drawing power out of this pearl white and they'll still bite it, they might come from 3 to 4 extra feet to see this sucker. This is not a bait that is gonna make a lot of noise. I feel like this is a sight feeding bait. They see this. You know, it ain't like a jerk bait that has a lot of knocks. It isn't a lateral feeding bait. So they really kind of need to see it. So if I can get in some dingy water and tie on a pearl white, shake that sucker through there and they see it and it glows, I'm at a very big advantage. So don't be afraid to use different colors and different watercolors, stuff like that. I haven't touched on seasons very well. Let's touch on seasons and why and when I start doing this. Okay, so you have to understand during the spawn, I feel like we have a flip of the lake. And I've always said this, there's an 80-20 rule, okay? 80% of the time, 80% of the bass are out in the middle of the lake. They're chasing bait. That's typically like what I think. At any given time, I think. But the only time that I think that flips is when they're spawning. So you got your months, March, April, May, when you get up north. But for the main, let's just say April. April, a lot of the fish are on the bank. This technique may not be that good that time of the year. During the fall, you have a lot of shad migrations. You see the shad on top of the water. You see schooling activity. So you have to keep in mind the fall and the winter time is probably the best time to do this. And in the early spring, you know, that early transition to pre-spawn, you know. Toledo Bend, it was warming up then. It was still kind of winter time. It was phenomenal. Fish were coming out of the depths and they were starting to move in and we just had a collision with them. So during your wintertime months, even in summertime, the fish are on bait. Anytime you're seeing schooling activity, be sure to have you a freeloader or a Mooch Minnow tied on. Get you a VMC hybrid jig head, get you a VMC tungsten jig head, try them out, get out there, chase the fish around. If you don't want to do that, pull up on a brush pile, you gotta try this technique. It's the hottest one out there.
Come up and smoked it. She was digging like she was a giant. All right, guys, right in the top lip, boop, on a 3/8. How about that? Dang good fish right there. All right, guys, it's gonna wrap it up. One of my favorite techniques, the hottest trend in the game right now. So I love doing this. A lot of fun, catch a lot of fish. There is a lot that goes into it. It's like a science project trying to make a good pitch and do all this, but this is my setup. That's what I really love doing. And be sure to go out to your local Bass Pro, check out the Mooch Minnow, the VMC jig heads, the Freeloader, and good luck on the water.